Robert Pattinson has been cast as Batman to star in The Batman, upcoming film to be written and directed by Matt Reeves. And of course, the internet has erupted in backlash. And I'll admit, when I first heard about it, my first thought was WTF. But I have to also admit that my outrage fuel tank has started to run a little bit low lately, even though I still regularly think about how much I was disappointed by Star Wars The Last Jedi. I find it harder and harder to get too up in arms, and I started thinking, could this actually be a good thing? That's coming up next. I'll start off the bat by saying Robert Pattinson would not have been my pick. I don't really see him as Batman. But on the other hand, he's come a long way since Twilight. By now, he's had a ton of projects under his belt, and he's gotten some good notices for several of them. Specifically, I'm interested in catching his recent sci-fi film, The High Life, and I've heard some good reviews of his performance. I just watched a video review of it on yourmoviesucks.org, and he thought Pattinson did pretty well, even though he had other concerns about the movie. So he's certainly not the same actor he was back during Twilight. He's grown in his career. And I thought it was interesting that it came down to Pattinson and Nicholas Hoult, both kind of having a bit of a reputation for being more emo actors. I don't know, is that unfair? I don't mean it in a bad way. And actually, I think that if you look at the recent superhero films, the ones with the most emotional resonance are the ones that have been the most successful. Thinking of Guardians of the Galaxy and Logan. And even Deadpool's success is largely, I think, because of the surprisingly emotional weight of the films, both the first and the second. And I have to admit, I am ready for a new direction. I was a little bit nonplussed with Zack Snyder's work on the character. I was very optimistic going into it. I still think Watchmen is and will be one of the great superhero comic book movie adaptations of all time. But I have to say that the creative decisions in Batman vs. Superman and Justice League definitely left me baffled about the character. I don't understand his take on the character. I mean, he's killing people left and right. He's using guns at, any whim. His Batmobile is a machine gunning tank. I mean, it was just a little strange, I thought. And so, like I say, I'm ready for a new direction. I'm ready for them to maybe experiment a little bit with the character. Definitely some cool stuff in there, but character-wise, just baffling to me. Really, I think when you look at the DC movies, the biggest problem, I think, comes down to studio mismanagement. And it's kind of hard to say that because I kind of love Warner Brothers. They're one of the oldest and most respected studios in Hollywood history. And I kind of fell in love with them back in college when I was studying film, and I was doing a paper on Humphrey Bogart's career. And so I was binge watching a ton of old Bogart movies I'd checked out from the library. And he was a contract player for Warner Brothers at the time, during his heyday. And so I was watching one after another of these pretty good, mostly Bogart movies from Warner Brothers. And at the beginning of every movie, I just started to become trained Pavlovian style when I saw the WB Shield logo. And so it's always been a studio that I've been really fond of. But I have to say, in recent times, I think that they have a serious leadership problem. And if you look at the last decade of the DCEU, it's been a bit of a debacle. I mean, lots of flops or poorly performing movies. And, we can argue back and forth about which of those movies were mismanaged or failures, either creatively or commercially, though you can partially go by data off that. But one thing that you can't really argue against is, if the studio is pulling movies away from the directors, that's not a good sign. A studio is really only justified in doing that if the director is out of control, if the director is mismanaging resources, if the director is not performing to a quota that they set. So much of a film's budget comes down to how efficiently it shoots and whether it goes over schedule. And so that's a high priority for them. That's one reason why directors are pulled from projects. Now, if you look at Han Solo, when Lord and Miller were pulled off that project, whether that was ultimately the right decision or not, or justified, is hard to tell since we don't really know all the details of what Lord and Miller were doing. But Disney's or Lucasfilm's contention there was that Lord and Miller were changing the script away from the pre-agreed to direction between Lord and Miller and Lucasfilm, hedging that script in a different direction, obviously a more comedic tone, which is not what they agreed to. Now, again, whether that's accurate, we can't really know without knowing a little bit more about it, specifically probably more from Lord and Miller and their side of the story. But if that's true, then that actually is a pretty legitimate reason to pull directors off a film. But that wasn't the case with DC, and twice within a year, they pulled off directors off of projects. David Ayers on Suicide Squad in 2016, and Zack Snyder off of Justice League in 2017. 2 times in 2 years. And really, Warner Brothers, in neither of those cases, was making a claim that Lucasfilm did, that those directors were mismanaging the production or not delivering the agreed to type of script and tone. They just decided late in the game, when they were getting cold feet, that they wanted to maybe try a different direction. Specifically, what happened to David Ayers, I thought was very insulting. To have a trailer company put a trailer out of the movie and just at the drop of a hat switch streams into elevating this trailer company to the boss of the film over Ayers was, he may work with Warner Brothers again, but I bet he still has some very hard feelings about that. And so, in the cases of Ayers and Snyder, they weren't this out of control director. They were delivering scripts that had been developed and approved by Warner Brothers. And it was Warner Brothers' own lack of confidence in the finished project, which wasn't even finished when it was taken away from them, that led to their decision. So it really looks like studio mismanagement more than it looks like mismanagement on Zack Snyder or David Ayers' part. Basically, I just want a good characterization, a more character-focused story this time around, and maybe even smaller and lower budget. If they deliver that, even if it's emo Batman, if they get that and they have a little kick-ass action in it, it'll be a movie I'll be totally open to, and I'll be there opening day. I think it's also important to remind fans that we've seen a lot of Batman in the last 30 years. I believe Batman is the most adapted superhero into live action film. That might have been usurped by maybe a Marvel character simply because there are so many crossovers. But if through the Batman movies, all except for really Justice League and Batman versus Superman, usually he was the solo character in the film. So anyways, he's had 10 appearances if you include Suicide Squad, and which obviously was a minor appearances. But, I'm interested in the adaptation process and how a different artist will approach a topic in a unique way compared to how other artist would approach it. And so, especially in the character of Batman, we've seen so many Batman, and so much of it has been good. There's a lot in the Burton stuff that's very good. Obviously, the Nolan trilogy is probably the seminal Batman. So, and we've had the Snyderverse Batman. So, at this point, I think, the character has, we treat iconic characters very reverently, which I think we should. But when you've had a certain amount of the character, especially in its most familiar, form, I think that's the time when you can start to look to change things up and maybe try going in a new direction. So, I think that even though I wouldn't have picked Robert Pattinson, and I'm not really jazzed about this casting, I'm interested. And especially, like I said, if they really hit the emotional chords, I think that it could be interesting, and I'm interested to see what they do with it. I'm still upset with WB's management of the DC brand. I think it's gotten better lately. They've obviously really started to make a comeback with Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and Shazam, but even that, it looks like they're going to cancel the Shazam franchise from any further installments just because it didn't quite make enough money, even though there's big plans they've been talking about for years about how intertwined that would be with the Black Adam movie. And now if they just ditch Shazam and do Black Adam completely separately, it would, that just strikes me as studio mismanagement. I really think that's what their biggest problem is now. So I think if they just let the creators focus on delivering the best scripts possible instead of the most commercial scripts possible, I think they can really make a comeback. They're kind of technically already on their way to doing it. So anyways, that's my thoughts on Robert Pattinson cast as Batman. Not as negative as you'll hear in other corners of the internet. So I thought it might be worth it to maybe put my 2 cents in there to balance out that opinion. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and check us out again. We'd love to see you here next time on Hero Journalism.